What's up guys, I just got hired to build a mobile coffee cart. I think I have all the supplies right here in my garage already, so I'm going to get started building that. I do need to order casters, got them ordered already, they should be here tomorrow, and the guy should be here tomorrow to give me the pieces that go on the top so I can get them measured and cut out. But for today, I'm going to get all this stuff cut out to size and hopefully get it mocked up and built out. First thing I need to do is get everything cut down to size. I'm going to do that using this here circular saw. Here are our measurements. Let's get started. First off, some of my measurements on that piece of paper were wrong, but I fixed it in the end. I'm not going to give you the measurements for the whole thing. You guys can build it however you want to whatever size you want. I'm sure you guys can figure that out yourselves. Yeah, I started cutting everything out using my circular saw and a straight edge and a T-square and my homemade track saw. All right, I got all the side panels cut out. Now it's time to frame the top and the bottom. I'm going to use some primed finger jointed 1x2s for the sideboards. I mitered them on my miter saw and then glued and pin nailed them with 23 gauge pin nails, and then I clamped them to make sure that everything stayed while I set it up to the side. Next I ripped a 1x4 down that was primed as well. I didn't have any more of the 1x2s, and I used that to frame in the bottom. This is when I realized I measured wrong, so I cut down the side panels a little bit shorter. Next I used some corner clamps to hold everything in place while I installed the hinges that allow the sides and the fronts to fold down flat. I then added a spacer to the other side and glued and nailed that into place so that the sides would not run into each other. Some of the nails and screws ended up poking through a little bit, so I just grinded them off smooth. I also messed up the measuring for the bottom, so I had to cut it a little bit, but that made it so that there was no back lip. Next I cut some more trim pieces in half and then cut them down to size to make a border around my side panel so that it would hold it into place. I did this on both the top and the bottom, making sure the top panel was centered, and then I used some credit cards as spacers. You can buy those off Amazon. They're pretty nice to have in the shop. And this is how it looks fully set up. All right, it's the next day. We got our wheels in. Let's install them. So these are sold as 5-inch casters. That means the wheel is 5 inches, but from the bottom of the wheel to the top of the mounting plate is 6 inches, which is what I was looking for. I got these off Amazon. You can get them off there too. I'll put the link in my description of this video. I just screwed them on with the hardware that they came with. It did poke through a little bit on the other side, so I had to grind it down, but that's fine. I used a straight edge and a ruler to make sure that everything was evenly spaced. It's not really that important because it's going to be underneath, but it was still a good thing to do. After I got it all assembled, I realized I made another miscalculation on my measurements and that I made it 6 inches too tall, so I have to go back and cut it down. All right, so I got to this point, but now I need to make it 6 inches shorter, so I'm going to cut the 3 side panels 6 inches shorter, and then I'm also going to put a shelf in it. I also need to adjust it and make it trim off a little bit of the right this way, like a little bit here, to make it fit on the top easier. And I'm going to adjust the way it folds in so that the shelf can sit in there. So I'm going to do all that now. Because I was cutting off smaller pieces now, I was finally able to use my table saw for this. So I just removed the hinges and made sure I knew which side was the bottom of each one. And I cut off 6 inches, and then I cut off a little bit off of the front, like maybe a 3/16 of an inch. Then it was time to reinstall my hinges. So I reinstalled the first one that had the single spacer, like the one before. Then I made a double spacer for the other side so that they wouldn't run into each other when they folded down. Next I cut down some pieces to use as the brackets that the shelf would sit on. So I cut them down to 1.5 inches. Cut some strips to use to put along here. That will be where I set my shelf on. So I'm going to measure with this 7.5 inches down to figure out where to put these. And I will glue and nail them in place. Like I said, I measured down 7.5 inches. That will account for the 3/4 of an inch for our shelf and 3/4 of an inch lip for the top panel, giving us a 6-inch shelf. So I nailed the first piece on, and then I cut a spot in the middle. This will allow a spot on the side panel to sit in there perfectly. As you can see, I'm nailing that in now. And then I did the same for the other side, making a space for it to go right there. And then I put one here, and this one hits the top, but that's okay. Here's how the pieces of the shelves miss each other. So you can see that piece doesn't hit there, and then this piece doesn't hit there. This piece has to sit here because that's not enough to hold it, but it makes it a lot thinner. Finally, it's time to measure and cut down the piece of wood for our top shelf. So I just cut it to size, and then I had to cut a little groove in each corner to make it clear the pieces that hold the hinges. All right, so I'm gonna have these two things being set into the top of this tabletop. So I need to cut out a hole for this and a hole for this. Let's get them measured. The client brought both of these by. He got them off of Amazon, and we set up the whole setup, including the coffee maker, on top of this so that we could figure out where everything needed to be. Then I just drilled a hole and cut them out to size. On the smaller one, I had to cut a couple extra holes in with a router to leave room for the screws to fit in. Next, I went back with the flush trim router bit and flattened down the top. I made the edges a little bit proud so that it could be flattened down and I wouldn't get into the layers of the plywood. So I did that, and then I went back with a 1/8 inch roundover bit and rounded over all the edges and corners, including the ones that were for the holes for the appliances to fit in. Finally, I drilled a 2-inch hole for the power cords for the coffee maker and grinder to fit through. All right, I got everything built. Last step is to put on some Bondo and sand it down, then I can do the painting. I've really grown to like using Bondo. I don't like applying it, I don't like sanding it, and I hate the smell of it, but it gives the best result when you're going to be painting. So I just went around and filled in all the cracks and holes around the top and then waited for it to dry. After the Bondo dried, I went back with my sander and sanded from 80 grit to 120 grit to 220 grit. I probably didn't need to go to 220 grit. I probably could have stopped at 120 grit, but it turned out very smooth. I forgot I needed to drill this hole in my shelf for the water hoses to run through, so I did that quickly with a 4-inch hole saw, and then I just rounded over the edges with the router. The last step was the painting. I'm going to save you having to watch me do all that. I'm just going to tell you that I did 1 coat of primer and 2 coats of paint. I sanded down before the last coat to make sure everything was nice and smooth, and I got everything nice and painted. All right, she's all done. Got the hole for this guy, hole cut for this guy. Those pipes can come down into that hole. I'll just sit a little low. There's a little shelf in here for some stuff. Some storage under there. Power cords can go through this hole. It's on casters, so the whole thing spins around. But if you want to lock it, you can just lock it down, pretty simple. On this over here, because of these screws, I cut out 2 grooves, so you can either go on this way, or if they want to come this way, you can go that way. All right, thanks for hanging out with me while I built this. I hope you learned something. I'm going to try to put a bunch of the supplies into the cart. I did not buy these, so I'm not sure exactly what they're called or how to list them, but I know I got them on Amazon because I was waiting for the Amazon order before I brought them over. So you can get these on Amazon. Yeah, make sure you check out my other videos and make sure you subscribe. Check me out on all the other social media platforms. And if you need anything built in the Austin, Texas area, let me know. Bye.